Alright guys, pop quiz. This one's going to be a tough one, but you actually all have a pretty decent chance of answering it correctly. Are you ready? Okay, make sure you're sitting down. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. What building is this? Take a good long look. I know it's kind of hard to see, but any guesses? Any guesses? Hey, I'm just pretending like I can hear you. Jimmy, what do you think? No, that's not the Kremlin. No, that's in Russia. It's not anything to do with that. Why? Okay. Susie, all other fake student who's not really here. That's correct. You are correct. Susie remembers, as I'm sure all of you do, way back in, I think it was in October, we had a very special guest star come to Bruns and talk to us about an important part of Canada's government. Any guesses? Yes? No? Still nothing. Okay, well, this is, as Susie pointed out correctly, the Supreme Court of Canada's building. Remember, we had that big assembly, and the actual Supreme Court justices were there, and they answered questions, and we got to actually hear directly from them. So, yeah, I'm sure you guys all remember that. You better. There'll be a quiz. Okay, maybe not, because I have no way of forcing you to take it. In any case, this is the actual building where laws are not made, right? They are reviewed. They are considered. If you remember way back to the beginning of the year in social studies, we talked about how the powers that the king used to have, which were to basically do everything. They had absolute power where they could both make laws and enforce them. And I shouldn't say both, because really it's an inclusion of kind of three big elements here. They can make laws, enforce them, and they can interpret the laws, right? So they could make up any rule they wanted. They could catch you if they felt like you weren't following that particular rule, and then they could decide what your punishment would be, which is great if the king is your buddy, but what if he's not? What if she's not, in the case of Catherine the Great or our current Queen Elizabeth? Although she seems pretty nice, so I think you might be okay. In any case, think of how dangerous that could be to give one person that kind of power. And we talked about lots of examples this year historically of how that's kind of gone wrong. So in our democratic system in Canada, we've taken that power and we split it into three parts of the government. So you've got your prime minister who gets to enforce laws. You've got your legislative branch, which is our House of Commons, and our Senate, and they're the ones that make the laws through process of debate. And then this is where the laws are interpreted. In fact, in any courtroom across the country, laws are interpreted. They look at the evidence, they look at the situation, and they decide based on the way the law is written and the information that they're able to find out about a case, and they decide if that person in fact did violate the law. The Supreme Court's job, like they talked about back in that assembly, is even more important because sometimes it's not always clear if what a person or an institution has done really actually violates the law as it's written. But also, sometimes the law as it's written is flawed, right? So just look at our voting rules, say 100 years ago, or a little bit longer now, where women couldn't vote, minorities couldn't vote. You couldn't vote if you didn't own land a little while before that. So that law as written violated some human rights that became part of Canada's constitution. So the law itself had to be changed, and the courts were an instrumental part of doing that because their job is to look at the law and decide if the law itself fits with the character of the country. Kind of complicated, but the big takeaway from this is, if you remember back to our very first lesson from social studies, one of the pillars of a successful democracy is rule of law. And what is rule of law? It basically means that you're not ruled by some tyrannical monarch. You're not ruled by a set of values that you have nothing to do with. You in this country are ruled by the law as it is written, and everybody has to follow by the same rules, no matter who you are, from the richest and most powerful or the prime minister himself, all the way down to some homeless guy on the street. You still have to follow the same rules. Now, is that always the case in reality? No. We know there are lots of examples of the law failing people or not being enforced fairly. But in general, as a country, we've moved forward in this way with huge strides, and we continue to. But we'll talk about that another time. For today, as I'm sure you've already figured out, we're talking about a little bit of social studies here. This is our final unit for this course. And kind of the nice thing, it worked out that this would be our final unit anyways. And it is one of the most crucial pieces for you to understand as you step forward into your next year of high school and get closer to becoming voting and thinking, although I think a lot of you guys are already thinking. But as you move towards becoming adult citizens of this country, it's really important that you understand how the law works in Canada. Now, obviously, to really understand it, you would probably need a lawyer, first of all, but I'm going to do my best as a social studies teacher. And you would need a multi-year degree from a university because it's complex. Now, luckily, like everything, we're just doing a simplified version of it so that you can kind of get a little bit of an understanding, because you need to understand the basics of rule of law. So let's take a closer look at what you're actually going to be doing for this. Let's go over here. All right, so back by popular demand, it's the self-assessment chart. A few differences this time. One, there will not be a unit test at the end of this for obvious reasons. It'd be pretty difficult for us to all get together. But this does, as always, list the things that you're supposed to know for this unit. Now, we're not necessarily going to have time to cover all of them, because this week and a little bit of next week, we're going to be doing this. And then after that, for our last week or so, I think we have 2 weeks after that, it's going to be Inquiry Project, the big finale of that. So at least that's the plan. It might change, but that's kind of the idea going forward here. But like always, this is going to give you a heads up of what you need to be watching for as we're studying this unit. The other thing about this unit is it's going to incorporate a bit of ELA as well, because it's kind of like the final unit for both courses. Unlike normal though, you don't need to have these made up as flashcards and be ready to study for the unit test, because there isn't going to be one. But what you are going to do instead is we're going to put a little more emphasis on it in terms of, as we're learning from this unit and doing assignments, you're going to record the information you get on this page as well. So for instance, today we're going to be looking at an assignment that may or may not, hint hint, nudge nudge, punch kick, may or may not be talking about the top 5 boxes or so. Maybe a few more, maybe a few less. You'll have to read and find out. And what you're going to do is, because this is OneNote and it's pretty, easy to move stuff around, is you're just going to record like 1-sentence answers for each of the boxes that you cover today. And this is going to be one of the things I use to mark your, give you marks for this unit in place of like a unit test type of thing. So the first assignment is 4.1. This will of course show up in your OneNote in a new folder called 4.0 Social Studies. As always, because it's a new folder and there's going to be new assignments in it, when you first go into your OneNote, it's possible it won't show up right away, but give it some time and sync it, and eventually it'll get there. You guys know how this works. In any case, this is 4.1, and it's the first assignment for this unit. And you can just follow the steps. You're going to read and annotate the document below. This is pretty much probably the final time you're going to do any annotation. You don't have to go overboard on this. I know some of you guys like to be really thorough. That's not really necessary, but as you're reading it, keep in mind that self-assessment chart, and that's kind of step 2 here. Record the relevant information on that self-assessment chart as you're reading it, and it does go in order of how we learn things over the course, chronologically, right? So if the first thing we're going to learn is going to be in the top left box, and then it works its way across and so on. Then that's it, you're done. There's no additional part for this assignment. Once you read and annotate it and you record the information off of it onto that self-assessment chart, boom, you're done. Move on to 4.2a, which is civil law versus criminal law, and that's up next here. These are both really short assignments, but I know that some of you guys like to have lots to do right now, and it never hurts to get as many done quickly as possible, so that's why I'm assigning 2 to start this unit off here. Before we move on to 4.2a though, let's take a bit of a closer look here. The first one, and I just want to talk about this with you guys really briefly, are these 4 bullet points. And these are kind of like the reasons why it's so important to have a set of what we call codified laws. And all codified really means is that they're written down so that anybody can look at them, and people in power can't just change the rules whenever they feel like, because I imagine you can figure out why that would be a pretty bad thing. So how are laws created? Well, we know they're created by legislation, and that's like the rules made in Parliament, right? Goes through that process of how a bill becomes a law to try and make sure it's as fair and thoughtful as possible. And then everyone's got to follow that same rule, and that's that rule of law concept. The main purpose of laws are really to guarantee peace, right? Because I think under normal circumstances, people are generally pretty peaceful. They're not going to get in each other's way or cause each other too much of a problem. But as we all know, sooner or later, there's going to be a disagreement. And if we don't have a way of solving that disagreement, things could get violent, or you could have a breakdown of society into different factions. And really, in a country as complex and as diverse as Canada, that's the last thing we need. That would be really, really bad, and it doesn't take much imagination to see why. So we have to have a fair way of figuring out how to solve disputes to avoid ending up in a really nasty situation. So the purpose of the law is to keep the peace, and it has to try to balance that desire for peace and fairness with the rules that we've all decided to agree on. It can't take a side, and it can't even be seen to take a side, because the minute that happens, it loses credibility. Just think, if you have a sibling and you get in a fight with them, if your parents always take your sibling's side, are you going to, your brother or sister's side, are you going to continue to really believe in the impartiality of their judgment? I'm sure your parents don't do that, but can you see how frustrated you would become if your teachers or your principals or the people in power or the people in your very own home always sided against you? You wouldn't believe in the system anymore. And the system knows that. We know that. And that's why the government and the legal system has to try to always be fair, because if it's not, nobody will take it seriously anymore. But the next one, this one's huge, is the real reason we have laws also is to make sure that we are able to exercise our rights. You have a lot of rights, like the right to an education. You have the right to free speech. You have the right to travel. And these are rights that require the government to make efforts to ensure that you are able to exercise those rights. So, for instance, one of the rights you have is the right to mobility. And for a disabled person who's maybe in a wheelchair, that means that the government has to provide you with ramps so that you can get up and down stairs, or an elevator, or some other means of exercising that right to mobility. And if a school or a business or a public place doesn't help you carry out that right, they can actually go to court for it and be forced by the government to add a elevator or a lift or whatnot. So you kind of see how, in order to have our rights, we do need to have a court system that can compel people to follow those rules so that you get to exercise your rights. It kind of seems like a bit of a negative thing, but you can kind of see what would happen if we didn't have it. And finally, laws are not written in stone. They're written in our democratic system. And what that means is they can change. And this is one of the reasons we talked about why our democratic system is pretty healthy. Again, it's got its flaws, but it can evolve and change based on our perceptions and our sensibilities, because we're not the same people we used to be 100 years ago. We've learned a lot, and so we can make changes to make the country better. So the people we elect to government, democratically elected people, can change the rules with the consent of the governed, which is us. And that's really important. Just like in your house, if you don't think that a rule is fair, maybe you think you should be allowed to stay up past 6 o'clock. I'm guessing you guys stay up later than that. But imagine if that was the rule. What if you had to go to bed at, well, we're a little more reasonable. Let's say you had to go to bed at 8 o'clock. But now you're almost finished grade 9. You guys have friends. You've got homework. You've got sports. You've got things that you are involved in. And maybe you're thinking, well, you know what? Maybe 8 o'clock being home is a little bit unfair. I'm a little too old for that now. So you go to your parents and you make your case, right? And eventually, I'm sure you'll be able to convince them that you should be allowed to stay up past 8, or even stay out past 8, oh my gosh, or later. But you kind of see how that works. So everything the government does and everything the court system is designed to do is really just helping us make decisions and make rules that are fair. So beyond that, you can take a look at the rest of this. It goes into some detail about the difference between private law and public law. They're two different branches. I'll let you read about that. And that actually leads us into our second assignment for this week here, which is the civil law crossword and readings. I say readings, but literally it's 2 pages. They're actually just listed right here at the bottom. They're straight out of the textbook, so enjoy. And all it is a crossword. You're going to read that information, use the information from 4.1, and fill in the crossword. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I hope you guys are doing well this week. Just like I said last week in the video, you want to make sure that by the end of this week, you are pretty much set with a good chunk of research for your inquiry project, and that you've checked off everything for the mythology unit. And also, if you have anything missing from before the suspension of classes back in March, get that done as well, because, believe it or not, we're actually getting close to the point where I have to finalize your grades. Remember, they can't go down, but they can go up. So if you go back and you rework something and you feel that you've added something to it that I should take a look at, let me know. Put it on, actually I'll show you here, in the general handouts page. Here we go. In the April report card, go back here and make a note for me. Tell me that I should go look at this particular assignment, because as you can see, we have a lot here, and this doesn't even include the ones since school closing. So as I'm flipping through, I might not see it unless you make me a note here. So remind me to go take a look at something. Also, just kind of on that note, a lot of you guys have been emailing your assignments to me. I appreciate that. However, my emails are pretty crazy over the course of the day, and so it's much better if you can actually just post it on your OneNote. So for instance, for this assignment, or for one of your mythology assignments, like if you make it as a video or a PowerPoint presentation, drag and drop it right onto this page so that I can easily find it. Because if it's in my email, between you guys and my grade 12 class, I have like 90 people emailing me. And as you can imagine, it's pretty easy to lose an email with that sort of email traffic. However, I do like hearing from you. It's nice to hear what you guys are up to. And I'm really glad we got to do that mythology unit, because you guys got some pretty creative answers and some really cool stories. Really some of the best, actually. I got to give you guys credit. We're doing this whole remote education thing, and you guys came through with some really cool work for that part. So good on you. So yeah, finish up that mythology stuff, get this stuff done, and make sure you take some time to finish up that inquiry piece there. The last thing I'll say for this is, just as a hint for the future, there's that bug again. Keep an eye out for law-related current events articles. You don't have to find and post them on this page, but start looking for them just in case it comes up in the next week or so here. All right, you guys take care, stay out of trouble, or get into some. Either way, have some fun. Bye, guys.